All across America, people are starting to segregate themselves according to their belief systems and philosophies. I'm hearing from people who are moving out of Los Angeles, for example. I'm hearing people who are moving out of other cities as well and just moving into the country. So some people are moving out of what they see as liberal cities, such as LA, and moving to more conservative cities or conservative states, such as Arizona or Nevada or Utah. Other people are just getting out of the cities in places like Oregon or Seattle. They're getting out of Seattle. They're moving to East Washington, which is very rural, or Eastern Oregon, which is also very rural. Heck, even Eastern California and much of Northern California is rural as well. I mean, the insanity of California is really just the left coast. It's a very narrow, thin strip that has all the crazy people. And of course, people are escaping that. But even in places like Texas, we have Austin, which is full of crazy people, crazy, insane leftists, who want to recreate, I guess, Venezuela in Austin, and it's halfway there with all the homeless people and the drug needles all over the streets now, turn it into a slum. That's what leftists do. They invade a city and turn it into a raging slum, and then they move on to another area, try to infest the next city and destroy it in the name of equality. But people are self-sorting or self-segregating. And they may think of it as along political lines, but I think about it as really being more about preparedness. If you're living in a city, you're living in a death trap. It's a death zone. If you're living in the country, you have more of a chance of surviving anything that comes our way. Cities are death traps for lots of reasons. I've mentioned some of this before, but very quickly as a summary, cities are artificial constructs. Los Angeles, for example, is an artificial city built in a desert. Cities import all the things that keep their people alive. Los Angeles, for example, imports water, electricity, food, medicine, all these things. And it exports raw human sewage. So it exports human crap and urine and pollution and car exhaust and all these things. So cities are polluters. Cities create toxins that they then spread in rural areas, and they are using up natural resources to exist. As a result, cities aren't very redundant, and they're not self-sustainable. In other words, if you cut off supplies to a city, if you cut off the water or the food or the electricity, cities become death traps virtually overnight. This is something to keep in mind as the Civil War unfolds. By the way, just as a side note, if you've got a bunch of domestic terrorists holed up in a city like Los Angeles or, I don't know, San Francisco, and they're running a terrorism campaign, which is what liberals have become now. The Democrat Party is a terrorist wing of the extreme radical left. One way you can defeat them without having to go to war and engage them kinetically, house to house or building to building, is just shut off the power. Shut off. I mean, it doesn't take much to shut off the main power to a city or the water supply to a city, and then it's pretty much over at that point because cities are artificial constructs. So if you're living in a city, you might have a death wish. I don't know, unless you have a lot of stored supplies, including 500 gallons of water in 55-gallon drums or something, which some people have. I mean, I've got a lot more than that, but I do rainwater collection, so I just have like a giant rainwater barrel. But some people have 55-gallon drums, and they store water in an apartment, but it gets heavy too. You can't push the weight limit of your floor either. But most people are not prepared in cities, and that's what makes cities so dangerous in one way, is that people are so ill-prepared that they will panic when something goes wrong because they're not prepared, because they don't know how to survive. Most people who live in cities are not preppers. There are some, and usually the preppers who live in cities are preppers who plan to get out of cities, but they just haven't, gathered enough money yet to move out. Every prepper in a city is a prepper who doesn't want to be in a city, by the way. They want to be in a rural area because that's how you survive. That's where survival has the best outcome. In a rural area, you have redundancy. You've got water. You can live without power. You can scrounge food. You can wild harvest food, or there's cows or deer, or if you're desperate, squirrels or what have you. You can eat lots of different wild game if you're desperate. And we have wild berries like crazy on our property. Once a year, wild berries. We've got nopal cactus that you can eat. I counted, I think, 7 or 8 different unique types of food on our property, which includes muscadine grapes that come in every year, and you can collect thousands of pounds of muscadine grapes practically anywhere in Central Texas if you just have a bucket and a pair of scissors. So there's redundancy in rural living that you don't have in city living. And you also, in the country, you have people who, of course, are more self-reliant and more sane. People who live out in nature or closer to nature tend to be more sane. People who live in cities tend to be on antidepressant drugs all the time. They're all crazy. Well, they're not all crazy, but some of them are totally mad. And it's a much higher incidence of mental illness among city dwellers than people who live in rural areas. That's a confirmable fact. So when you're talking about segregating yourself and deciding where to be when it all hits the fan and you see this civil war accelerating now in America, if you're not already in a rural area, you might need to make that a very high priority. It probably should be like close to number 1 on your list, in my opinion. You're welcome to your own assessment, of course. But in my opinion, getting out of the city is key, and I see people doing that more and more because cities are death traps. So make your own choice, but understand that choices have consequences. And I want you to do well. I want you to survive. I want you to thrive. I want you to be safe. And to do that, I think you need to, look at getting out of the city. Unless you're in a city that's probably going to be more peaceful, like Salt Lake City. There's not going to be crazy, insane riots in Salt Lake City. So if you're in a peaceful city like that, you might be just fine. But if you're in Los Angeles or Houston or St. Louis or Miami, forget it. Those are going to be death zones and very hard for law-abiding people to survive. So keep all that in mind. And thanks for listening. You can check out my website, survival.news, for survival tips and survival gear, lots of things like that. And of course, we've got collapse.news, which covers the accelerating collapse, both the economic collapse, the social collapse, and the civil war that's coming in America. So check out all those websites. My name's Mike Adams, known as the Health Ranger, and you can hear my podcasts at healthrangerreport.com. And yes, I live in the country. I am fully prepared to survive almost anything, and I just want to help other people get to where I am, because it took me a couple of decades to get to this place in terms of self-reliance and redundancy and personal security and all these things. I just want to help you get there. That's all. Because it's actually pretty nice to live in a way where you know that you can survive almost anything. And the cities could collapse tomorrow, and where I am and my neighbors in Central Texas, we would all be just fine. Not much would change, actually, in Central Texas. So, hey, just don't all of you move to Central Texas, please. I should stop mentioning it because property prices keep rising around here. But I don't know. I guess if you're a patriot, come to Texas. If you're not a patriot, stay the hell away. Okay? All right. Thank you.
Learn more at healthrangerreport.com.
Thank you for watching. If you want to support our mission, visit us at healthrangerstore.com for the world's largest selection of lab-verified superfood and nutritional products for healthy living. It's at healthrangerstore.com.